This is the BioCentury Show. Brought to you by the inaugural BioCentury Grand Rounds Europe, debuting in Cambridge, UK this September. Connect with VCs, academic innovators, and biopharma R&D and BD leaders to explore groundbreaking advancements in early-stage R&D and dive into disease biology, therapeutic modalities, and enabling technologies. Learn more at biocenturygrandroundseurope.com.
Hello and welcome to the BioCentury Show. I'm Simone Fishburne, Editor-in-Chief at BioCentury, and today I am joined by a good friend, Annalisa Jenkins, one of the most prominent women in biotech, and now also a leading name. I'm going to call you even an influencer in the UK ecosystem, a topic that we'll talk about today. Annalisa, you should also know, comes to us today from her boat, or a boat, north of Sicily, you tell me, near some volcanic action. So let's hope we keep a stable conversation. All views are welcome. Annalisa has over 25 years experience in the biopharma industry, previously head of global R&D and EVP of global development and medical at Merck Serono, several senior positions at BMS, including SVP and head of global medical affairs, has been CEO of Dimension Therapeutics, which she took public on NASDAQ and then sold to Ultragenyx, and is on the boards of several interesting and growing companies, as well as Genomics England, Faster Cures, member of the Science Board to the FDA, chair of the court at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and a bunch of other things that you do in your spare time. Perhaps most unusually in our industry, Annalisa started out as a medical officer in the British Royal Navy. And I can tell you, we won't get into it today, but if you ever have the opportunity to chat with Annalisa over a drink, very colorful stories to tell of hanging off helicopters and things like that. So clearly a very active present and past. Annalisa, we first met about a decade ago in Beijing, and I think that we can agree that in the time since then, many, many things have changed in, let alone our industry. And we will come back to China, but I want to start in the UK. There we were, two British expats, maybe, having tea at the top of a tall hotel building in Beijing. Both of us, though, were pursuing careers outside of the UK, even though maybe we both were keeping a keen interest on what's going on in there. Now, you've gone back full time. There's been tremendous growth in the UK, but it's still a very early stage oriented ecosystem. The government has made life sciences one of the cornerstones of its growth strategy, but it's sort of said that in the past. So what do you think it means in practice? And you've told me you seem to be very enthusiastic about UK biotech. Tell us what's behind the enthusiasm.
Well, thanks, Simone, and thanks for having me today. It's wonderful to have this opportunity to chat with you today for BioCentury, and lots of happy memories along the way over the last 10, 15 years with you guys. And goodness, times have changed, but changed largely, I think, for the good. And there's been so much progress over the last 10 years. Let's talk a little bit about the UK. I came back at the end of 17, and I just sold Dimension to Ultragenyx. And a number of people said to me, well, why would you go back to the UK? Why would you not stay in Boston, stay in the US, where you've been for many, many years? And I said, well, I think it's because I see an opportunity. I see an opportunity finally in the UK to translate so much of the great substrate coming out of the academic institutions into companies that can really grow, really contribute. And also, you know, in those days, if you remember, the regulatory environment had made significant progress. There were a number of incentives in the system, and I just felt that this was really a great opportunity for me to come back, contribute to UK PLC, and to try and help the UK really sort of take its place as one of the top 2 or 3 ecosystems in the world in our sector. Now, what I would say is that, it's like everything in life, it had tremendous momentum, I think, in those days. And you wrote a lot about that, actually, at the time. And we've seen some choppy waters. Obviously, we've all gone through COVID. And we can talk a little bit about where the UK found itself during COVID and some of the really great opportunities that came out of the COVID period. But where we are today, and perhaps we can unpack this a little bit over the next few minutes, is that on the one hand, we have a new healthcare strategy that's just been published, which of course really talks a lot about the evolution of healthcare and the necessary need to shift healthcare from analog to digital, from disease to prevention, from in-hospital out into community. These are all trends and macro trends in many ecosystems, healthcare ecosystems, which are really an opportunity for our industry, because none of that's going to happen without implementing the innovation coming out of our sector. The life science strategy, of course, is doubling down as well on technology, but also importantly on ensuring we have the right people, the right skill sets and talents that we need to drive our companies forward, to have the right incentives in the system, financially. Can talk a little bit about growth capital. That's been a hot topic in the UK for the last few years. And, also doubling down on wanting to bring manufacturing into the UK, particularly in cell and gene therapy. There are a number of different areas of focus. I was quite pleased, actually, Simone, about the fact that the new life science strategy was far more simplified and focused. There are 5 or 6 key areas that we need to double down on. I think that's really important, because there are many papers that come out on how to evolve and progress a life science strategy, but you've got to have focus, and you've got to align your money, align the people, align your incentives to make it happen.
So I'm going to come back to a couple of the things in that strategy. Also, first of all, let's sort of put it where it is, because since about 2016, I mean, UK, in terms of venture capital, new co-creation, it's way ahead of its European peers. And it's really, it's second to Boston and San Francisco. And I'm not sure how it exactly compares with China right now, but it's certainly one of the fastest growing. Growth capital is something we can talk about. John Bell, back, I think it was 2017, maybe, when he laid out the strategy. I mean, we interviewed him at the time. He really felt that it would be a mature ecosystem. He wanted to see 4 20 billion plus companies, market cap companies. I don't think the AstraZenecas and the GSKs count. He's talking about biotechs that have gotten there. And, you're right, the UK has weathered what I consider quite a lot of blows that didn't knock it over, okay? Brexit, Woodford collapse, the pandemic, one thing after another. And so, I think that there is real momentum, but I also see that it published a life science industrial strategy in the past, the government. Do you look at what it's just published? Did that just not work out so well? Is this a reboot? Do you think it builds on it? I think what I'm trying to capture is there's great momentum until now, but what next? Because like you talked about, there's that big growth capital. It's very early stage heavy in the UK, or biased in the UK, versus companies that really are sort of further along in the pipeline and in their capital.
I think that, you're quite right. What you didn't mention also is I think we've had a number of political transitions in the UK. We're on like number 5 or 6 prime minister. And, we all know that when you're in a sector like ours that needs consistent, sustained investment and long-term investment, really the antithesis of progress is a continuous recycling of leadership, which can sometimes result in never-ending changes to policy and priorities and funding. Now, what I would say, though, today, compared with 10 years ago, there are a couple of really core points to make. One is that it doesn't matter which political party you talk to, all of them understand that growth and prosperity for UK PLC and competitiveness and flourishing of society resides upon an innovation technology-led platform, industrial strategy. And actually, I was part of a group that authored, and the lead author was Lord Richard Harrington. It's called the Harrington Report, which was on foreign direct investment and life sciences. Healthcare tech innovation featured very strongly at the center of that broader paper, looking to how to attract foreign direct investment into this ecosystem. So I think that, the current administration clearly believes that the life sciences sector should sit firmly at the center of the future of our economy. The second, and I think this is a really major shift, is that maybe it was the pandemic. I think it probably was largely attributed to the pandemic. But now I think economists, our Treasury, and the broader political elite now understand that health and wellness, the health of a nation, is also directly linked to the wealth of a nation. So I'm very confident that fundamentally, the system now really understands that you need a strong, vibrant innovation sector to drive forward a flourishing economy, and that health and science and innovation firmly lie at the center. This is the third time that this sector paper has been published, and I think they've built upon each other, but there have been some common themes, Simone. So the fact that we wanted to lead in the area of cell and gene therapy, advanced manufacturing, regulatory science, the fact that we wanted to be the home of really tech translation out of our vibrant ecosystem, those really have not changed. So to answer directly your question, what really now needs to happen? There are three things that need to happen. Number one, we do need to continue to focus on how to attract and scale capital into the ecosystem. That's been a perennial issue. It's not unique to the UK. The second is we need to be very progressive on our immigration and visa policies to be able to attract the best and the brightest. Very topical for now.
We'll get to that afterwards, right? We're going to go back there.
And thirdly, we really need to ensure our culture continues to progress, because we're British, and the British can sometimes be seen as somewhat cautious, perhaps not willing to celebrate success, perhaps not willing to feel that wealth creation and health creation can go together. And so this notion of risk-taking, accepting failures, etc., I think is really important. I guess lastly, I would add that for a life sciences strategy to be really successful, you need a highly functioning market. And of course, there have been a number of questions, and certainly I've been at the center of some of those questions around this topic of, can you build unicorns in this sector from the AIM and the FTSE? And do you really have to leave the UK and head to the US to really be able to get access to high quality capital at the right cost, but also that values the fundamentals in your company in a way that is globally competitive?
Well, sort of one response to that is, is there really a harm in going to NASDAQ, which is sort of probably going to be the reality for a while. But I actually want to go in a slightly different direction right now and pick up on some of the things. So, one thing that is in the that the UK has that I think is an advantage, but is certainly part of its strategy, is because it has this integrated healthcare system with the NHS and this tremendous amount of data. It is in a position to marry biotech and biotech innovation with that infrastructure. In the US, it's very fragmented. And so that's a harder thing to do from a strategic point of view. But one thing I want to go into in terms of one of the strategy's aims, which I think is kind of interesting, is its plan to accelerate clinical startup timelines. Now, that is an area, you're involved with a lot of small companies. This is a major choke point for companies, the amount of time it takes to get trials started, right? So China is, of course, a big competitor. Australia is becoming a player. In the 2023 government report, that from the UK, it said in 2020, it took 247 days from trial application to first patient dosing. It was 155 days in the US and under 200 in Spain and Australia. And so the new goal is actually to get ahead of the US, to get under 150 days. And what I wanted to ask you before we go to the break is, can you talk a little bit about how it is or how it could be that the UK really can sort of bend the curve with a clinical strategy on those sort of startup times?
Yes, and of course, a topic close to my heart. You know that obviously I've been in this area of clinical development for many, many years. And today, actually, I sit on the board of a number of companies that are pursuing decentralized clinical trial models globally, but specifically in the US, site networks. I'm in the clinical services sector, as well as in a number of companies wishing to pursue their trials in the UK. Now, what I would say to you is that this was an area where the UK really was leading and making huge progress about 10, 12 years ago. The UK was a very attractive place for companies to come and to start their phase 1-2 clinical studies. And as you mentioned, attractive for many reasons, including, the NHS, a great place in those days in which to conduct your clinical research. I think, during Brexit and that whole period, where we had to separate out from the European Medicines Agency, set up the MHRA as an independent regulatory organization, I think, things did go in reverse, I have to say. And so what we have now, of course, is a doubling down on the commitment to try and attract back sponsors, as well as those in the academic communities to conduct their clinical research. The government really has noticed a significant fall off in the number of patients participating in clinical research and has made a very dedicated effort and set numbers that they wish to hit in terms of the participatory rates. And of course, I feel very passionate about that, because what we saw during the pandemic was that the UK led the world in being able to set up these broad-based clinical trials and recruit tens of thousands of patients very quickly. And we need to build upon that and progress. Lawrence Tallow has been recently appointed as the new head of the MHRA. Had dinner with him last week. He's a young, very smart man who, and I specifically spoke to him about this last week, who is absolutely dedicated to look at how he can staff and focus on regulatory pathways that are globally competitive. It's about focus. It's about having the right people. It's about having the right risk tolerance. We talked a lot about that last week, about what risks you wish to take. And it's actually about being very, very, very focused on measuring what you do and holding yourself to account. So I will say that this is going to be a very key core focus of Lawrence and his new team. And by the way, just to finish on that, he's now looking for a new chief medical officer, chief scientific officer in one role. So now I'm very active with my colleagues and networks looking for the right person to come in to help Lawrence to advance this agenda.
Okay, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we'll pick up on MHRA and the life science ecosystem in the UK.
Great.
Grand Rounds, BioCentury's R&D conference, will make its European debut in 2025. Join us to debate key translational bottlenecks and unlock scientific breakthroughs with commercial potential. Connect with VCs, academic innovators, and biopharma R&D and BD leaders to explore cutting-edge advancements in early-stage R&D as we dive into disease biology, therapeutic modalities, and enabling technologies. Join us for the inaugural BioCentury Grand Rounds Europe in Cambridge, UK, the September 17th to 19th. Register and learn more at biocenturygrandroundseurope.com.
Hello, we are back at the BioCentury Show with Annalisa Jenkins. Annalisa, before we went to the break, we talked about the new head of MHRA, Lawrence Tallow, who's stepping in at a really important time. But he also inherits an agency that really hasn't found its feet, since maybe EMA left for Amsterdam post-Brexit. So you talked before the break about some of the challenges. We know that staffing is going to be a challenge. I've got a question on that in a minute. I'm wondering whether it's realistic to think that the MHRA can excel in areas that really put it ahead of places like FDA or MHRA, that it can become the agency of choice for innovators for any reason. Can you talk about how it may take longer than a year or two, it will take some time, but what the vision should be of what MHRA's status should be in the world?
Yeah, so I'm actually very confident that the MHRA has an opportunity in the coming years to take its place as one of the top 4 or 5 regulators in the world. I actually personally, over my career, have always viewed the MHRA, frankly, even when it was part, obviously, of the broader European regulatory framework, as a place where one could go and sit with regulators that were steeped in regulatory science. The key, of course, for all regulators is to be able to advance regulatory science consistent with the advancement of science out in the ecosystem. That has been the biggest challenge for all the agencies. And as you know, I did serve on the Science and Policy Board for the FDA for a number of years. And that was a very core part of the discussions we would have as an advisory committee is how do you plan the workforce for the future when science is traveling at the speed of sound, as it were. Now, the UK has always prided itself in its in the science of rare diseases and advanced therapeutics, cell and gene therapy. And I think that even today, I as you know, recently helped to spin out a new rare disease platform from UPenn with Professor Jim Wilson. You interviewed Jim. And I want to point out that our entire regulatory team for Gemma Therapeutics is based in the UK. And I also, want to highlight that I think that today, those who are pursuing rare disease programs, particularly with advanced therapeutics, are routinely coming to the MHRA for advice. The other point is that the concept of mutual recognition is also, I think, going to play a key role for the MHRA. I was talking to Lawrence last week, and there is going to be, I think, a much more collaborative, closer relationship between the FDA and the MHRA when it comes to early phase clinical trials, and again, particularly in the areas of high unmet medical needs. So I do think you'll start to see this progression. The other point I want to make is around manufacturing, CMC manufacturing. Again, I think we do in the UK have the opportunity to take the lead in this space, again, largely based on years and years of thought leadership. So
you're talking about manufacturing for cell and gene therapies, or for everything, like continuous manufacturing for, traditional modalities?
Well, if you remember, in the first iteration of the Industrial Life Science Strategy, cell and gene therapy manufacturing was at its center. And you're aware of and I think our listeners will be aware of the certain so-called catapults that were set up. Mm-hmm. The facility that was established just north of London in Stevenage. So this has been a continual push and a continual area of focus. Of course, again, I serve on the board of Genomics England, and it's been a number of years since we sequenced the first 100,000 genomes, and having that as a major focus of the government, along with the UK Biobank and now our Future Health, which are major programs all looking at how genomics is going to play a core key role in healthcare moving forward. It starts to build this cluster and ecosystem and culture. And I think, the regulatory science has aligned with that and has followed that. So I actually do think that the MHRA has the opportunity. Now, you mentioned it's all about workforce. So it's all about making sure that we can get the right leadership into the top team that sets the culture, because down through the organization, and Lawrence and I again were talking about this, and recognized June Rain, the previous head of the MHRA, for building a really good bedrock of talent through the MHRA. Now it's got to be led with focus and prioritization.
And do you think that, because one of the issues was always there just wasn't enough money to staff it, do you think that the new strategy is really committing the kind of money that it needs?
Well, that's the big question, of course, when with all these, when you issue a strategy, is do you have the right number of resources and commitment over a period of time consistently to be able to execute on it? I mean, what I would say is that in the report, there were dedicated resources. I do hear that this government is completely dedicated to providing and unlocking those resources. So I actually think it's not going to be a matter of capital for MHRA. I suspect it's going to be a matter of finding, hiring, retaining the right people.
So I'm going to go where you opened the door. I was going to go there anyway and talk about FDA, right?
Yeah.
Because you talked about a greater alliance between MHRA and FDA. Now, FDA's got its own staffing crisis, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, it's got a lot of leadership turnover. Much of what I hear is sort of around uncertainty and people not really knowing the direction of FDA or if what it says today will, or what it said last year will be upheld this year. So, how are other international biotechs and stakeholders viewing the agency? And is it really is pegging yourself to an alliance with FDA a good strategy for now, or is that something that you need to let the waters calm a little bit?
Well, so of course, we all, and again, our listeners are all paying very close attention to what's going on at the FDA.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
And to answer your question, of course, I get probably, if not daily, weekly inbounds from UK European companies, to try and unpack and really to try and understand how to plan, the interactions with FDA. Clearly, I think, though, if I look at FDA today, the big macro issues around workforce, staffing, culture, risk-taking, I think we're all aware of. I will say on the ground, though, it's a bit context dependent. I'm working, obviously, in the psychedelic space with Compass Pathways. We just recently delivered our first phase 3 clinical trial on the back of a positive phase 2. And I would say that the relationship with that division is very collaborative, open. I think that, we are going to work with them on seeing how we can move forward. And, our team on the ground today are not noticing any particular change. I think the same is true in the rare disease space. Certainly the work we're doing in AAV gene therapy and beyond with the very rare diseases, lysosomal storage disorders, etc. I think collaborative. Have been some changes, so difficult to navigate. Obviously, the market hates uncertainty and hates the fact, really does not like the fact that, there is a large amount of change going on in the largest, most influential agency in the world. So that clearly is not great for our sector. To answer, though, the question about the UK, so it depends. I think that in these very rare diseases or in some very highly specialist cases where a review has been successful in the US, I believe that the UK may well be happy to take a slightly more accelerated view in a culture of mutual recognition. And I do see some early signs of that.
Do you think it can ever work the other way?
That's more difficult because of the way that the regulatory science in the US is fundamentally different from the UK. So, really encoded in the Code of Federal Regulations rather than in Europe, as much more pragmatic. And, it's a different culture. So I'm not sure it worked the other way. But I certainly believe that, that the UK certainly can become a home for companies. I guess a point that I'm increasingly making to CEOs is that in the past, you started your company and the first thing you thought of, let's go to the US. Now, I think many companies are not taking that view. And I'm saying in early phases, well, consider Australia, consider Canada, consider the UK. What we haven't addressed today, which is really interesting, is the Australian model, where you can go straight into phase 1, first in human, without going to the TGA, and it all resides in the particular institution and its ethics committee. I do know that the UK are looking at that. And actually, I'm part of a Milk and Faster Cures effort at the moment that is curating a large body of work on progressive regulatory reform, potentially for the FDA. And those sorts of models are now being looked at. So I think a lot's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years in this space. I do think, though, what we really need to do is to give the markets predictability. They don't like surprises. And I think we do need to have regulatory pathways that are enabled and put into place in a consistent way. That's really what concerns me most of all, Simone, at the moment.
So that is also a great segue. I want us to go back to where we started in China, right? Now, BioCentury identified the opportunity in China a long time ago when others were still saying, what are you doing there? You were one of the pharma folks who were saying the same thing. It's now obviously a growing and huge part of the ecosystem. We are also seeing a lot of collaboration and opportunities. So in our analysis of deals, from actually not just China, but Asia licensors, about 2/3 of the deals since 2023 were with Western biotechs rather than farmers, which I found very interesting. So you're working with a lot of small biotechs. Do they look at what's going on in China as opportunity for partnership, as competition? What do you see happening, and how are people looking at this landscape?
Yes, one of my favorite topics. I first went to China in 2000, and I was there when Pudong was just a series of empty warehouses, and Wuxi Pharma had its first office in 2000. And, what was so interesting at the time, and consistently went back there many, many times over the years, was even in those days, a government that really had a vision and a strategy and a plan for 30 years. And look, here we are 25 years later, and they've executed on that plan amazingly. I think the political situation over there, of course, is fundamentally different, and therefore does enable this long-term commitment. But look at where we are today. It's exactly what they articulated, frankly, in the early part of the turn of the century, 2000 to 2002. So the answer to the question is, it's fascinating to hear the diversity of views on China. And it largely depends really on experience, and people that have experienced life in China, prosecuting drug development programs, working with the academic institutions and working with the ecosystem. There's a group of leaders and pharmaceutical biotech executives who are very comfortable with China because their careers have taken them to China. They've had very positive experiences. And then those that I still come across that have never been to China. Okay, so of course, on the one hand, I think that obviously, and of course, what you're seeing, and congratulations on your fantastic report. It was excellent because it really unpacked this really interesting trend, which is that large pharma filling their pipelines off to China, very comfortable because they've been there for many, many years commercially, and basically lifting IP out of China to scale it and globalize it, which of course China loves because China has a China for China strategy. Small biotechs with leaders, I've seen a number of my colleagues, and in fact, a company that I'm working with on the West Coast in obesity, Sky Biosciences, we've been in dialogue continually with academic institutions in China because we're very comfortable with the scientists that we're working with that we've known for a number of years. So I think that what you're going to see is a continuation of this trend. You will, I think the other point is that many people were quite skeptical about the quality of data coming out of the clinical trials.
Right.
And many people were also skeptical about, the IP. But I can tell you that China has evolved fundamentally. It's in their interest that IP is upheld and that the IP is robust so that it can come out of China and be scaled. It's in their interest that there is quality in the clinical trials. And, there are exceptions to this rule, but overall, it's a great place to go and do clinical research and get a proof of confidence. And it's a great place to get early clinical data. But you have to have people on the ground that know China, and you have to have partners that are trusted. And there are many now organizations that can facilitate that dynamic between the West and China. I'm part of a group in London that's just been set up called the Crimson Gateway, which is particularly doing this, connecting biotech companies with academic institutions with IP in China and trying to work through how to solidify those collaborations and to get the deals done so that this IP and innovation can exit China and more broadly go into Western healthcare systems.
Well, Annalisa, you have given me an opportunity for a shameless plug of our China Healthcare Summit, October 22nd to 24th in Shanghai, which is exactly the place that young biotechs, or even not so young biotechs, who've not been should go and find out what's going on. And even those who have been should go and find out what's going on. It's really a great meeting. We also, of course, have for our UK or people who are able to get to the UK, our Grand Rounds conference in Cambridge, 17th to 19th, where I will see you again. And we look forward to the next conversation. Thank you very much for joining today.
Thank you, Simone. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks.
Brought to you by the inaugural BioCentury Grand Rounds Europe, debuting in Cambridge, UK this September. Connect with VCs, academic innovators, and biopharma R&D and BD leaders to explore groundbreaking advancements in early-stage R&D and dive into disease biology, therapeutic modalities, and enabling technologies. Learn more at biocenturygrandroundseurope.com.